Hello, Jill.
Hello, hello.
You can start.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you. I didn't know if you were going to say anything. Hi, guys. So great to be here today. Thank you so much for joining me. It is actually a little bit cooler out today. So I debated on whether or not we were going to do this inside or outside, but I went with inside. But I want to make sure that if you guys have any questions about grilling or anything like that for these steaks or this pork tenderloin, I want you guys to make sure you incorporate that into the conversation. So as always, before we get started with the cooking, I want to talk about food safety and why it is important to make sure that we know the basic rules when we're working with raw meats. Now, if you joined us last week, you know that we talked about chicken and how there is a debate on whether or not you rinse your chicken when you take it out of the package. Well, um, I want to talk about that with this because when you are purchasing beef or pork, there's a little bit of the same debate. All right. Now, I've got today two absolutely beautiful grass fed filet mignon. All right. These are center cut fillets from the beef tenderloin. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but you'll notice that they're nice and dry. These were dry packed. All right. That means they come in a package that has no moisture added to it. They just wrap them up for me, ready to go. All right. Easy peasy. No rinsing or maintenance needed. But let's say we're talking about pork tenderloin today, too. This guy comes cryovac. All right. Now, when you have something that comes cryovac, it is always going to have some sort of moisture in there to help keep it whatever fresh, whatever they call it. Okay, and they've got reasons for putting all of that stuff in there. I talked a little bit about last week buying things that come in a package. Excuse me, buying meat that comes in a package where the plastic on top starts to get domed. It's that dome when it shows up. It's those gases that they put through the chemicals into the meat that are there for give it a longer life. Okay, on the shelf. You won't get that so much in this cryovac, but what you do get is all the goo. All right. So in this case, we do want to rinse this off. But just like the chicken that we talked about last week, once we rinse this off, guys, you're going to want to immediately wipe down your sink and your countertop around the sink to make sure that you don't get any cross contamination from any of the goo that gets left behind. So those are going to be the top two food safety issues that we're talking about today with beef and pork, neither which are as highly susceptible to salmonella as chicken or other poultry is. Okay. Now, another thing about steak that I want to talk about is I like to cook my steaks when they are at room temperature. Okay. That is a very important piece to know because you don't want those cold centers to stall the cooking process. So if you take the steak directly, actually any meat, guys, directly from the refrigeration and take it to the heat, you're going to get these cold spots. All right. And it's going to cause uneven cooking. Now, is it a deal breaker where you're like, oh, I'm not going to? No, of course not. You forget to do it. Oh, well. But if you want to do this properly and, chef technique, that is one thing that we like to do is cook our steaks when they are at room temperature. Okay. So these can be at room temperature for 4 hours before they start to build up any kind of negative bacteria. So that means that I could put this out at 8 o'clock in the morning from the refrigerator, leave it sit out until noon, and then cook it and be fine. Okay. Does it need to be out for 4 hours? No. Generally speaking, 30 to 40 minutes is all it's going to take for any additional moisture to be sucked back into the protein or even left on the plate or cutting board. All right. So about 30 minutes is what you want. That is completely fine. You're not going to have any negative bacteria growth by letting that rest at room temperature and build its own internal temperature. Okay. Pork, Same thing, guys. It is not nearly as susceptible to any of the bacteria that chicken and poultry is. Of course, if you leave it out or you undercook it, all of that can be put into play. But when you're just talking about, hey, I'm going to cook this pork tenderloin and I want it to be at room temperature, you can absolutely leave it out for, anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour without having any issues. Okay. Before I move on, does anyone have any questions about food safety? Okay, so I know you're probably like me and you're ready to cook anyway. So let's go ahead and get started because we are going to start with the pork tenderloin.
Oh, there is
Now,
a question here.
One of the things I want to.
Sorry.
Oh,
Oh,
okay, great.
sorry. There's a
No,
question.
that's
Gloves
fine.
or no gloves? Gloves.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely gloves all the time. If I'm at work, now here at home, I don't ever worry about it because I've got my sink right here. I can wash up immediately. But when I'm handling multiple proteins or multiple parts of this dish all at once, gloves are an excellent way to handle meat because then you can just take them off and throw them away and move on to the next item. But as always, gloves can also contaminate. So make sure that once you do use them, you do replace them. All right. So yeah, I love a good glove and I use them at work all the time. Now, I want to talk specifically about pork tenderloin for a second, and I'm going to actually bring this closer so that you guys can hopefully, the light's not too bright, you can see the word tenderloin, okay? Now, this is a pork tenderloin. I don't mean to talk at you like you're stupid, but the number one thing people mistake at the grocery store is pork tenderloin versus center cut pork loin. Okay. They are packaged very, very similarly. And they are always right next to each other at the grocery store. And the thing about it is this, guys, a pork tenderloin is its own cut of meat. It comes from around the underside of the rib, alongside the belly. It is an underused muscle, which is why it is so tender. Okay. It is, for me, the best cut on the beast. And there is no replacing this because of its texture and its tender nature. The center cut pork loin, on the other hand, okay, comes from the pork loin, which is a huge, incredibly lean piece of muscle from the pig. And there's almost no fat on it. Okay. And when you have a piece of meat that has almost no fat on it, there's going to be two things that are missing automatically. One is flavor, right? Because fat equals flavor. And number two is texture. And the reason I say that is because there is nothing to self baste when you cook pork loin. When you cook a steak that has marbling in it, or specifically, let's talk about bacon because that is a piece of pork. All that fat in there, all right, that creates flavor. It also helps to self baste the meat as it cooks. That fat dissolves and goes down into the meat, creating unctuous flavor and texture. When you don't have that, then you don't get any of that addition to the texture of the meat. So what happens is it gets really, really, really dry and it never truly gets tender. So you can cook it overnight. You can cook it for an hour. You can cut it into pork chops and throw it in a skillet, but it will never truly be a tender, juicy piece of meat. So when you are buying a pork tenderloin, you absolutely have to see the word tenderloin, not always tender pork loin, tenderloin. Okay. That really, really does make a difference. So this is my favorite cut of pork, aside from the pork butt, of course, which is multi usage. But for the roast that we're going to do today, this is what we're going to use. Now, I do want to also talk while I'm opening this up about roasts because I feel like, especially these days, roasts are underused. I don't even really see a lot of options for them at the grocery store these days. You'll get your general chuck roast, and occasionally you'll find a rump roast. But for the most part, they're fairly small. And when they trim them at the store, they don't get in there and take out all of the veins and tissue on the inside. And let me tell you guys, when in this specific area in Kansas City, when barbecue is king, and we specifically do a ton of pulled pork, that is important because if you just take the pork butt straight out of the package and you go and put it on the grill or you wrap it up and put it in the smoker or whatever you're doing, and you don't take the time to really break it down and get in there and pull out the veins and the tendons, all of that transfers into the eating. And then you get all those weird textures in there that nobody really wants. So make sure that you kind of dig into those and open them up. They're going to actually cook faster if you do that anyway, and get all those weird bits and bobbles out of there. All right. Now, you notice I've got this wrapped up in my paper towel. That is because I didn't want to transfer a lot of the goo, as I so educatedly called that, all over my cutting board. Now I'm just going to take this over here and just cold water, just a low dribble, okay? And all I want to do is just rinse this off a little bit to make sure that there's none of the packaging solution left on it. All right, and then I'm just going to take my paper towel and come back over to my cutting board and go ahead and lay it flat now. So I've successfully eliminated all of the goo part of it. And, you know, those things that they put in there, our country does everything it can to make sure that every piece of food we buy is going to keep us healthy. So I try not to complain too much about all that stuff, but we just don't need it once it comes time to cooking. Okay. So what we want to do now is trim this bad boy up because it has some stuff on here that we do not want to eat. And the first thing that you're going to see here is the silver skin. All right. And this is called silver skin because it is literally shiny and has a silvery tint to it. But it's inedible. It's really, really, really yucky, and you don't want to eat it. It is doesn't really have flavor, but the texture is kind of like chewing on a rubber band. Okay, it's never going to break down. It's never going to soften. So we need to eliminate it from our beautiful piece of pork. And then this guy, which I bought at Trader Joe's, and I did that because this is one of the only packages that comes with a single tenderloin in it. All right. Most grocery stores, when they sell a pork tenderloin, it comes with two. And I only needed the one today, so I just ran to Trader Joe's. But they did a really good job of trimming off a lot of the excess fat. But as they usually do, they left that nasty silver skin on there. So I'm going to use my Craftsman knife. The reason I'm pointing this out is because I want you guys to see how this tip is very, very pointy. Okay. He's very, very sharp, very, very pointy. And he's also very narrow at the tip. I'm not using my chef knife for this because he actually has a wider base. Right back here is wider. And also the angle of the knife is actually wider as well. And so this guy is thinner and he's a little bit more flexible. And so he's going to be able to work through this. Now, if you do not have a thinner knife like this, you can use your chef knife. Just make sure that you take nice thin strokes so that you're not hacking it up and taking a bunch of meat off. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a little slit right here between the silver skin and the pork. Okay. And what we want to do is just take that tip and go right underneath that. Mind your fingers, of course, in just a nice thin movement. And that has given me a little lip or a little handle to hold on to. Okay. And I'm mostly going to let gravity do the work here, but I want to make sure that I have something to hold on to. And so I'm just going to utilize the entire blade, and I'm going to hold the silver skin up while I gently slide the knife back and forth until I get that silver skin. And you can see, yeah, there's some meat on there. I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of chefs out there who can get it without any, but I will take that. Now I'm just going to take that tip and go underneath this little sliver of silver skin. Whew, that was hard to say. And capture that and get that off. Okay. And then I'm going to do the same thing for this little space right here. Just get my tip of my knife underneath it. Let gravity hold the pork in place while I just gently run my knife. Now, this little guy right here, I want to take off and just in a little bit of extra stuff there that doesn't need to be on there. Now, I'm going to go ahead and leave this little bit of fat that is kind of hanging out along here because that, again, like I said earlier, fat equals flavor, okay? And that will all render off, but it will render out into the pan, which will give it a little bit of porky flavor. I'm going to just cut that last little bit of silver skin off, okay? So you can see that the folks at Trader Joe's did a pretty good job of trimming this initially. I didn't have to take a lot off. Now, the reason why we're starting with this is because we are actually cooking this with two methods. We are going to brown it first, and this is one of those other pro tips that I was kind of referring to earlier with the roast. When we cook a roast, okay, meaning a pork roast or a beef roast, a chuck, an arm, a butt, whatever, one mistake that a lot of people do make, especially at home, is that they do not brown it first. And they just put it directly into the slow cooker or the Dutch oven or your Instapot or whatever it is, but they skip that step of browning. Now, what happens during the browning process that really makes a difference in flavor, texture, and color? All right. The first thing is very scientific.
Maillard
very
reaction.
Good. Very, very good. The Maillard reaction. That's exactly right. And it's science, which makes the cooking part so cool. And I really geek out here, so bear with me. But what happens is during the Maillard reaction, the proteins fall down from the surface of the fat, okay, which is always hanging out on the surface of the pan, right? That's where the fat is. So the proteins start out there. And then they start to break down into, you probably guessed it, sugars. And then those sugars, and that is where, yes, sugar, it's natural. It occurs in everything. It's in our body. That's what runs our insulin and all of that jazz. Same thing in an animal, right? So if it contains protein, it will eventually break down into sugars during the cooking process. And those sugars will end up caramelizing. And it's that caramelization that gives you texture, color, and most importantly, flavor. So we don't want to skip that part when we are talking about roasting any kind of meat or vegetable, quite frankly, okay? Because once I put the lid on this, it's not going to develop any color in the oven. And that is going to be the second part of this cooking process. So what we want to do now is we want to, heat the pan. So we're going to go ahead and get my pan. I want it to be about medium high. So let's see, this goes all the way to 20. We're going to go to 15. That'll give me 5 degrees either way to play with between medium and high. All right. I want to let that get really, really high. I am using a nice enamel coated cast iron brazier. And I like this pan because it can go straight into the oven. All right. It has a great lid. If you have a pan like this, it'll work. If you have any skillet that has a lid that fits, it'll work. If your handle is plastic and you're like, ooh, I don't know if that's going to be oven safe, simply wrap the handle and even the lid handle, if it's plastic as well, in aluminum foil, and it's now oven ready. Okay. So we're going to season this because we do want to make sure that we get as much flavor as possible. I will tell you that pork tenderloin, while it will pretty much absorb any flavor you put with it, on its own is not overly flavorful, okay? And so because of that, we want to make sure that we give it as much flavor as possible. And you guys, I apologize. I got to let my dog in. I thought he'd be able to handle it, but I can see the saliva dripping from his poor mouth. So it got warmer outside than I thought it would. You're a good boy. Thank you. Can you say hi? He says hi, everybody. Okay. So what we want to do is we're going to keep it pretty simple. Salt and pepper, obviously. But then I'm going to add one of my favorite seasonings. This is a Harvest Blend seasoning. It has lots of citrus notes in it, including dry mustard and parsley, but it's got lemon and orange and lime, and I love all that, especially with pork. So, but whatever seasoning you like. I mean, you can even just keep it salt and pepper, because you could also top this with a fabulous sauce, which we are actually going to make if we have enough time, and I can shut up and get to cooking. So first things first, we are going to do some salt, and I've got some lovely coarse sea salt here. In this situation, I always prefer a coarse salt so that I can see how much salt I am actually using on the meat. It's very important that you use enough salt here, because if you don't, it's going to end up being bland. And with meat, you kind of do need a lot of salt, right? Because on its own, it doesn't have a lot of natural salty flavor to it. So we want to make sure that we're liberal with it. Now, don't get crazy, but definitely be generous. Then we're going to do our black pepper. And while I always prefer fresh ground black pepper, I think I told you guys last time, I have terrible arthritis in both hands, and I cannot run a pepper mill anymore. So I have requested an electric pepper mill for my 50th birthday in November, and I'm sure I will get one. They're not overly expensive, so I'm sure he's going to present me one along with lots of black balloons or something like that. Okay, so salt and pepper. Now I want to go ahead and use a little bit of my seasoning. I don't want to use all of it right now, because I do want to add a little bit of this to the sauce later on. And what's great about using this pan is that it will collect all of the juices that are released from the pork, but also we're going to add a little bit of chicken broth to the pan so it has some braising liquid, okay? Now, you have a couple of options at this point. You can cut this in half. So if your pan is not quite big enough to hold the entire tenderloin, you can absolutely cut this in half. Season both halves equally, and then you can put them side by side in your pan. But I like to leave it whole if I can, so that when I go to serve this, I can slice it on the bias, and it just makes a really nice presentation on the platter. So we are going to start with some canola oil. We always want to make sure the pan is hot before we add the oil. Why is that important? Two reasons. One, because if we add oil to a cold pan and let it heat up, the oil is actually going to stick to the pan. And guys, if the oil sticks to the pan, what is everything else going to do? So the other reason is because metal, no matter what kind you use, expands as it heats. And there's all kinds of little divots and crevices and things in your pans that you don't even see with our human eye. And because of that, if you, again, put the oil in a cold pan, the oil will fall down into those cracks and crevices and, again, promote sticking. So we just want to make sure that the oil goes all the way around the pan. So very, very, very carefully make sure that you give it a little turn. And then we're going to take this beautifully seasoned pork tenderloin, and we're going to go straight into the pan, and we're going to walk away for a second. Why are we walking away? Because our temptation to fiddle with this and start moving it around and making sure it's not sticking and making sure that the oil is where it needs to be and all that stuff is so great that we usually cannot leave it alone. So we just walk away for a minute, okay? Find something else to do in the kitchen. Go wash a dish or make your salad or whatever. But don't fiddle with this, because right now, science is working. The Maillard reaction is going on. And all of that protein coming down and turning into sugars and caramelizing is happening. All right. That is what's happening in this pan right now. And if we go to fiddle with it, we're going to disturb that. And we don't
have a
want to
question
because,
here. Jill, we have a
oh,
question here. So
excellent.
somebody's
Let's hear it.
asking, why would you use canola oil versus olive oil? And I would follow up, or avocado oil.
Okay. So avocado oil is great. I love it. You can use it at a high temperature, which is nice. It is 90% flavorless. But avocado oil is very green, has a very distinct color, and it also can get very oily in your mouth. Because of the way the fat is drawn from the avocado, it feels very oily. Now, I love it for a lot of things. One of my favorite ways to use avocado oil is in a salad dressing, because you don't need nearly as much because it is so oily. But I like canola oil because it is really light in color. It is absolutely flavorless, and it can go up to 425 degrees without burning. Olive oil, depending on whether you're using extra virgin olive oil or full olive oil, and you know what I'm referring to here, okay? You've got your pure olive oil, and then you have your extra virgin. This is first press, this is mature. Extra virgin olive oil will start to burn and smoke at 350 degrees. All right, I'm well over that in my pan here. Pure olive oil can go up to about 400 degrees, but you can never get away from the olive oil flavor. Okay. Now, in some dishes, like in Italian food, where the olive oil flavor is complementary, great. I love to use it. But where I do not want the oil to play a part in the flavor base of my dish, I always go for canola. Always. And I know that some people are like, oh, the processing, blah. It's a personal choice. I love canola oil. It has not done a darn thing to me. I just went to the doctor and all of my numbers are fabulous. So I'm going to stick with what works best in my diet. But if you prefer to use any of those, great. Just know that in a pan like this that's on medium high and you use extra virgin olive oil, it's going to smoke and it's going to burn on the bottom of your pan, which is going to cause a flavor conflict when it comes to making the sauce. Now, I hope that I answered that question enough.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Yes, I am going to add just a little bit more oil because you never want the pan to get dry. If you let the pan get dry, then that's when things start to burn and stick. And once they start to get hot, we're going to use a hot pad to really make sure everybody stays safe. But what I'm looking for at this point, you guys, is gathering up beautiful color and texture on the outside of this pork tenderloin. Whew, I just swallowed some smoke. Sorry about that. And what that is going to do is just enhance the dish all the way around. Now, if you were with me 2 weeks ago, I think it was, when we did the chicken class, I know that we talked about what all the good stuff that collects on the bottom of the pan is called. So, pop quiz. What do we call it? What's the good stuff on the bottom of the pan called?
Oh, no, I don't think we discussed it. I forgot the name,
Did
but
I really
knew.
not talk about it? No. I see somebody said something.
Oh, yeah, font. Yeah, that's true. Font, yeah.
Very, very good. I told you if I was nerdy about it, you guys would remember. And it is because we are fond of the flavor that all of that imparts in our dish. Now, all I did was flip over my cutting board so that I don't have any more raw meat juices or anything like that on there, because we're going to do a little bit of more work on there. But the fond is French for foundation or base, which is exactly what it does for the sauce later. It builds the sauce. It all comes from that. So I just want to make sure that all sides of this bad boy, look at that, gorgeous. And that is what we want to see. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start the braising process, which is going to finish in the oven. So I'm going to grab two things, a measuring cup and some chicken bouillon. Now, if you have freshly made chicken broth in your refrigerator or your freezer, I highly recommend using that. I don't have any right now, and any really good cook will always have the Knorr chicken seasoning in your cabinet, okay? It's made in Mexico, so every good Mexican cook has it. It is what I grew up with, and I love it. So I'm just gonna make my own, okay? We've got a little bit of water here, a little bit of chicken broth powder. Just gonna stir that together. And I'm gonna turn the heat down, all right, to medium low. So now I'm down to 5, from 15 to 5. And I'm gonna stand back because, you know, as soon as the wet hits the hot, it's going to splatter. Now, we are not poaching this, okay? We are not boiling this. We are braising and pan roasting all at the same time. So what that means is we don't need the liquid to come all the way up and coat and cover the meat. We only need about an inch or so because it's only going to be in the oven now for about 10 minutes because pork tenderloin is best at medium rare. Now, I've got my oven set at 400. I've got my rack in the upper third, okay? And we're gonna take our pan now, lid on, and we're just gonna pop it into the oven. And because we seasoned the pork really well, we did not have to add anything else to the liquid. Now, we are keeping it basic because we are just talking about an introduction of how to cook pork and beef. But if you wanted to add any vegetables to that, root vegetables are fabulous. They'll cook in that broth. They'll get nice and soft. You could do any kind of greens in there. One of my favorite things to cook with that are Brussels sprouts, asparagus, oh my God, anything, sweet corn, whatever you got. So you can throw stuff in there if you want to at this point, and it'll cook together. And of course, all the flavors will blend. I'm just keeping it very, very simple today so that you guys can really focus on understanding the way the meat is cooking. So speaking of which, what's happening in there now? We've got the lid on. We've got a little bit of braising liquid in there. So now that heat inside that brazier is going to start to circulate because the steam is going to come up and it's going to have nowhere to go, right? And so it's going to hit the top of that pan and it's going to start to circulate. And what's going to happen is it's going to start going around and around like this. And you're going to see the top of my pan is going to turn really dark and get kind of a film on it, which is more fond. Yes, Magda, did you have a question?
Sorry, I just clicked on some no, never mind. Please ignore me.
Oh, okay, no problem. So all of that is going to cause what we call braising, okay? So it's going to have a little bit of moisture falling from the top as it's got moisture on the bottom as well. And so when we pull that out, which I should probably set a timer just to make sure I don't forget, let's go 7 minutes because I've been talking. And I briefly touched on the fact that pork tenderloin is great at medium rare, okay? So we want to pull that out when it's right at about 132. If it goes over, it's not going to hurt anything. It just won't be quite as pink center, okay? In the meantime, I'm really excited to cook these steaks. I love a filet. Now, if you are a ribeye kind of person or a strip kind of person, totally fine. Guess what? This technique for cooking the steak is going to be the exact same no matter what type of steak you're cooking. Now, I will tell you, growing up, I did not eat red meat. I mean, well, I did because I was forced to, but I hated it. We were poor. And so if we ever had steaks, they were like these little minute steaks that were like this thick. and they would cook in 2 seconds in the pan. And for whatever reason, I had in my head that if it was red, that meant blood. And, you know, because you're not an uneducated child and your parents don't know that it's actually not blood. It's juice, and it's all part of what comes with the cooking process. But you have to think about this, guys. This is no longer alive, so there's no blood. Okay, doesn't matter what temperature you cook it to, there will never be any blood in it because it's not alive. So that being said, it's all based on temperature and what you want the internal temperature to taste and feel like when you eat it. If you are a rare steak person, the interior of that steak is going to be maybe room temperature, but much, much colder, even to the touch, than the outside of the steak. If you're medium rare, it should have a warm, light pink center. Okay. Very, very, I'm sorry, it should have a cool pink center, meaning it should be very, very juicy, very red in the middle, not bloody looking, but it should have just a tinge of warm to it. Medium should be a warm pink center, okay? And that means that the actual temperature of it feels warmer than it would on a rare piece. I feel like I confused myself
Jill,
there.
I have a question and a comment. I want to ask, where do you
Okay,
buy?
I have a question.
So where do you, is it okay to ask now? Where do you buy your meat? You know, like filet mignon. And if you ever heard the technique, like, let me see, when you like open your palm and between your thumb and your index finger, this is, yeah.
Yes. Okay. So, absolutely. No, that's a great. I just sometimes I prattle on and confuse myself. So I just want to make sure everybody's cool with what I was trying to say there.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I buy a lot of my steaks at Price Chopper. Okay, actually almost all of my meat, whether it's beef, pork, or chicken. I buy a lot of it at Price Chopper. We do KC Pride, which means a lot of it is local. And I almost only buy from a butcher, right? From a person that I can talk to. I very rarely buy meat that is prepackaged. However, when I do, I love me some Trader Joe's. And I actually don't mind Aldi either. Aldi has some pretty good meat too. I will say though that there are times when at Aldi, when it looks really good on the package and then you get to eating it, it's like, oh, this is really tough, or it has a lot of weird gristle in it. But for the most part, these two came from Price Chopper. All right. And I think I can say this, but I prefer Cosentino's Price Chopper. Those are my favorites. They do a really, really nice job. I also love Hen House. I do not buy meat at Hy-Vee. I do not like the way that they handle it. I do not like the way they package it. I do not like the way they take it out of a package and put it behind the meat counter and then pretend to cut it. So McGonagall's is a great place, or whatever they call it now.
Fairway.
Yeah. It'll always be McGonagall's to me. I'm sorry. That's just how it is. But you can see that this tenderloin looks really good. There's a little bit of fat, which again, I'm going to leave because fat equals flavor. And in this situation, most of it will render off, okay? And anything that's left in there will be tender enough to eat if you're into that, or you can just slice around it. Now, I'm just keeping my eye because I can actually smell that pork, and it's got 2 minutes left. But I want to go ahead and take the temperature and make sure that we don't overcook this. And so I'm going to pull this out, and I've got an instant read thermometer. Oh my God, it smells amazing. And all we did is just that little bit of chicken broth, right? Now, remember, we don't go straight down. We always go in at an angle to try to get the closest internal temperature we can. I'm going to go in through the side as well. Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, so it's pretty much done. So what I'm going to do is take my cutting board here. And I'm going to take it out of the braising liquid, pop it onto my cutting board, and we are going to let that rest for just a few minutes. Okay. And during that rest time, everything's going to come back all inside the pork so that when I slice it, it's going to stay juicy and it's not going to run all over the cutting board. All right. And in the meantime, just to keep things going, I'm going to turn this on to medium and let it start to come to a simmer because I want to reduce it down a little bit. Now, my pan over here is hot. I can see it smoking. So we are going to bust these out. Once again, I don't ever put anything but salt and pepper on my filet mignon, okay? And that is because it doesn't need it. It's got such great flavor. But I do salt the heck out of it because it does need the salt. It's going to enhance its own flavor, and it's going to help build a beautiful crust on there. I failed to turn off my timer. Sorry. So we're going to get a nice salt and pepper crust on the outside of each of these. Did you guys see that?
Oh, yes.
Well, the entertainment factor is always high here in Jill's kitchen. All right, so a little bit more salt, a little bit more pepper on the side. As always, using my fingers so that I make sure I get good coverage and I'm in control of how much we're using. Now, we're going to start with canola oil here. If you want to start with any other oil, just fine. But just remember, it's going to start smoking, even with this, because I've got this sucker on 18. So he's going to be hot. Now, what we're going to do is we are going to baste these in butter. So I have added the oil to one side. We are going to, there you go. See, smoking. This guy is hot, 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 and that's how we want him. Straight down. And you guessed it, do not touch, okay? Do not touch it. We are going to let it just do its thing. But I want you guys to see. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to get as close as I can, because what I want you guys to watch is what we call the cook line, okay? The cook line is this line right down here that's going to start to change color as the steaks cook. And what's going to end up happening is that is going to creep up the side of the steak. When we flip it, then it's going to get a new cook line on the other side. And our goal every time is to make sure that the space between the cook lines is always even. We don't want one that's really, really wide and one that's really narrow so that you have a weird, misshapen space in the center of how your food is cooked. Okay, so let us back that back up. Hopefully you guys can still see that all okay. Thank you for going on that little field trip with me. Now, in the meantime, I'm going to keep my eye on that cook line. And what I want to do is just take a little peek. Okay, just a little peek. I don't want to turn it all the way over and I don't want to pull it all the way off. If this is sticking, that means it's not ready yet. The crust has not been created and it is not ready to turn. So let it dictate to you. Now, I can already take a little peek there, a little peek there. I want just a little more color. So I'm just going to let it go for just another 30 to 45 seconds. All right. And then in the meantime, we're going to go back here to our sauce real quick. And it's starting to look good. Get my little whisk here. We're going to just take everything from the bottom off to the top, meaning we're just going to scrape off all that pond. And I want to show you the top of the lid so that you can see what I was talking about. Hopefully the light's not too bright, but you can see where it was self-basting. It would hit the pan and then start to run off. All of that goes back over the pork and then into drippings. That's good stuff right there. Okay, now we talked a little bit about in the chicken when we listen to our food and it'll tell us, hey, the sound has changed. There's no more moisture in between me and the pan. So it's ready to flip. And beautiful. All right. Make sure and swing that through some oil. Huh? Gorgeous. I always try to move it so like the steaks were in this position, and when I flip them, now they're here. Okay, so they started at 3 and 9, now they're at noon and 6. That's because those spots where they were at are colder than the ones that were empty. So by just moving it a quarter, it's going to get a better sear on that. And once again, I'm listening because I put it into the oil, put it where I want it. There's a lot of sizzling going on, but it still sounds slappy, okay, kind of like wet. And once that goes away, we know it's time to turn it. Now, I'm going to also rotate my pan here. It's getting smoky up in this kitchen, let me tell you. Excuse me. We're going to rotate the pan too, just to make sure that there's no hot or cold spots underneath it, okay? Now, if I was doing this on a grill, this procedure would be the exact same. I put it on the grill. Don't forget, we do have a grilling class that's coming up, but also you always want to make sure you oil the grill, not just the food, oil the grill. So once you put your steaks on the grill, you don't fiddle with them, okay? You let them get caramelized. You let that Maillard reaction happen. And once that happens, then you can start flipping them over. And once you have flipped them once, you can continue to flip them as many times as you want until the steak is at the desired temperature. All right. Now, this guy is starting to look really, really good. And I'm going to show you guys the cook line. You can see it. You can see where it's red here, starting to get pinker around there. Okay. Look at that color on that side. So now we're going to flip this on its side because we want to make sure all sides have color. Okay. All the sides have color. That's really, really important. We don't want to sit this down on a plate and have it be all like weird around the edges, like it was wrapped with bacon, but it isn't. So we're just going to leave it for just long enough to make sure that it gets some good color. Not necessarily trying to cook that part, but definitely want to make sure we get color around those edges. All right. Now, that's only going to need a second. I just want to take a peek back here. All right. I've got pretty much all the fond off of the bottom of the pan. And so we're going to finish this up here in a second. I just don't want it to reduce to nothing. I want you guys to see that pan sauce. It's so good. Come on, stand up. I do utilize the sides of the pan when needed to hold the sides of the steak up to make sure that I can walk away from it and I'm not standing there fiddling with it, right? That's super duper important, as I said before. Okay. So I feel like this is looking really good. Now I'm just going to lay it back down because now, Magda, let's talk about this situation. When I press on this steak, and work with me here, I think I'm going to take you on another little field trip because I want you to see. When I press on this, got a lot of give, okay? These are about an inch and a half thick. So there's a lot of raw meat in there. So how do you identify? Yes, you can always do the whole, this is well done. You start like this and then you start going like this, blah, 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 blah. But the number one way to never, ever fail is to use a thermometer. I'm sorry. Also, not sorry because meat is expensive, you guys. And even these two steaks that I got at Trader Joe's today, or oh no, I got that at Trader Joe's. I got these at Price Chopper. They were $25.99 a pound on sale. So you don't want to mess them up. So I, of course, am trained, highly trained. I'm going to turn this off. So I can tell just by pressing on them, they're good. But we're going to baste these up just a little bit. So I've got some really good Irish butter here. And I'm going to take a couple pats into the pan, let them start to melt down. Then I'm going to take my pan here, give it a little shimmy. I am going to add some garlic, one whole piece of garlic in its paper wrapper, okay, in its little husk, because I'm not trying to eat the garlic. I just want to infuse it into the dish as much as possible. And then I've got some thyme, and I'm just going to take a nice sprig of that and throw that in there as well. Now, mind you, the burner's off, okay? Burner is off. All I want to do now is start to take this butter that is now infused with garlic and thyme, and I'm just going to start spooning it over the top of the steak. This is the part where my mouth starts watering and I speed things up because nobody else is here to eat this, which means it's all to me. Now, that butter basting is going to add a ton of flavor to this. But just like pork, it needs to rest. So we were going to, let's temp it first. And as always, we go in through the side. Yep, perfection. So let's take this whole thing over here. We're going to just lay that there. Okay, we're going to keep this though, because that's all good stuff. Now, last thing we're going to do is we're going to mount some butter. So let me turn that back on, pull this over. It has reduced to the point where it coats the bottom of the pan. And because it coats the bottom of the pan, it will coat the pork. So we're going to mount some butter in it. We're going to take this butter and we are slowly just going to stir it in and just let it do its thing. I'm going to grab my, what do I do with my whisk? There it is. Okay. So we're going to just let that butter melt all the way through. And it's automatically giving it a shine, a sheen. It's gorgeous. Now I've got a little bit of heavy cream, but it's not regular heavy cream, plant-based. Okay, I also got that at Price Chopper. What's beautiful about heavy cream, guys, whether it's plant-based or dairy, it will thicken naturally with heat. So I don't have to add any flour to this. I don't need to make a roux or a slurry or anything like that. We are just going to let the cream heat through and it will combine with the butter and combine with all the pan drippings into this delicious, crazy good sauce. And then we're going to add one thing right before we finish it. And it needs some acid. Okay. It's got fat, right? From the pork and the drippings. It's got heat from the black pepper that's in there. Definitely has salt from all the seasoning that we put in there, including the chicken broth bouillon. So I'm going to turn that off. It's perfect. So now it needs some acid. And that can come in many different forms. Today, though, we are going to make it come from our lemon. And so we're going to take a little bit of lemon zest, because all the best parts of the lemon are in the zest. And if I haven't already said this to you guys, it is an absolute rule in my house. If I'm going to use a lemon for its juice, I am definitely using its skin for zest. So, cutting off, okay, around the seeds. I think I want just a little bit more. That was very little. Yeah, there we go. So, Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. That's a great book by Samin Nosrat. It is a great series on Netflix, but it is also an excellent theory to always maintain when cooking so that you don't forget to add something. Salt, fat, acid, heat. Okay, so now I just want to taste this. Oh, yes. That is almost perfect. It does need just a touch more salt. And because I told you, remember, we're going to add a little bit more of this. Always pour it into my hand. Add that in. I'm very excited. 2 reasons. 1, because I love this dish, and 2, because dinner's done. I don't have to cook tonight. Now, what we want to do here comes the real test, right, guys? So we're going to slide our, oh, that is so juicy. I'm actually going to do it this way. Okay. So here's our pork tenderloin. Now, if you remember, it filled the whole pan. Well, it lost about 3 inches in the cooking process. So it has shrunk up, which is why I like to leave it whole for service. All right. So at this point, we want to make sure that it is not overcooked. Although with pork tenderloin, it's pretty hard to overcook it because it just gets more and more tender to the point it'll fall apart. So what I'm going to do is we're going to cut on an angle. So instead of cutting straight down, we're going to tilt our knife to a 45-degree angle, and we're going to cut this direction. All right. And so by doing that, we're going to get a better surface area. We're going to get more surface area, and it's going to be gorgeous on the platter. And I can already tell you that this is perfectly cooked. I am very, very pleased at how this turned out. Not that I was real worried about it, but when I'm talking, sometimes I can talk too much and then we miss the boat. So for the grand reveal, allow me to grab a plata. Okay, and then we don't want to smother this in sauce because it's perfectly cooked. So instead, what we want to do is we're going to put the sauce on the bottom of the plate. Okay? That's what we're going to do. Ooh, that's what I'd rather have. Thank you. So I'm just going to scrape. And remember, it sticks. Just gonna pour that hot, hot. Give it a little help with the direction of which you want it to go. Right? Ah, gorgeous. Now, take our perfectly cooked pork and we are going to rotate the pieces out so that you can see them. And they are gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. And then the last thing I'm going to do is just a little bit more of that sea salt that's really coarse. You could do your Himalayan salt right now, your Maldon, whatever. Let me show you this, guys. Oh, let me just show you this. Can you see how
Beautiful.
perfectly pink that is? Now, if this was a pork butt, do we want this to be medium rare? No, we do not. We want it to go to at least 145 degrees. But because this is a pork tenderloin, remember, tenderloin, we can do this at medium rare. If this was a always tender center cut pork loin, could we serve this at medium rare? No, we need to go to at least 180 degrees so that it is remotely tender enough to even shred. All right. So that is a gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous platter of pork. And now the piece de resistance, we need to make sure that our steaks turned out medium rare as well. So let's grab him over here. And as I promised you, we kept that butter, right? For a reason. This is a teeny tiny little plate. Maybe I should get a slightly bigger one. There we go. Okay. And we are going to make sure that we get some of that butter out of there for this plate. Okay. So same kind of situation. If we go straight down, we're only going to end up with a piece that's that wide. But if we go on the bias, we get some that are much wider. You have much better surface area. Oh, it's perfection time in Jill's kitchen for steak. I am just like knocked out excited to eat this. I'm not even joking with you. I have lettuce down there. I'm going to make a beautiful steak salad for myself. I wish you guys could all be here right now. But let's just take a look. That beautiful, gorgeous steak. Okay. But specifically, because I want you to make sure, yes, let's talk about that because yum. But what I want you to see are the cook lines that we talked about. I'm going to hold it like this so I can point. This is a cook line. This is a cook line. You see how they're even? That is the important part. We don't want this cook line to creep all the way up into here so that you only get a little tiny sliver of medium rare. We want as much medium rare as possible. So we let it sear to get that beautiful, beautiful crust, right? And then we turn it to get crust on the other side. And after that, we can go ahead and turn it as many times as we need to until it's our desired temperature so that it gets an even cook line all the way around. Okay? Now, who has questions?
Well, I don't see any, but this is excellent. You gave me some weekend cooking ideas.
Yeah. A little bit of that beautiful butter over the top because why not? It's there. And then, of course, you know, you can garnish your dish and everybody will know exactly what you used in it. But you guys, these classes are so much fun. I hope that you all have had as good a time as I have. Of course, I could have fun just by myself in a brown paper bag if that's where you put me. But anytime there's food, I really feel like we can have a great time. We can be like one big happy family. So, Magda, thank you so much
All
for
right.
having me
Well,
in.
thank you.
And
Thank you.
thank you.
We have more classes coming next month with Jill. So please sign up. Looks delicious. Thank you. People are typing in thank you. All right. Well, enjoy your meals. See you next month.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank you
everyone. Bye
guys.
bye.
Happy